Aromages are an interesting archetype only within the question of whether or not they will be competitive in the current environment. Aromages represent the reintroduction of sorts to the deck concept of using life point gain to produce advantage, for the first time really since Agents. However, there are a number of individuals who are skeptical that a life gain deck can be competitive, so will the black sheep of the past set, Clash of Rebellion, fade into obscurity or rise to claim a competitive place in Yu-Gi-Oh! On a consistent basis? Let's figure it out from at least one perspective. Of course, being a newer archetype, there is less direct support for Aromages, but generally the size of the support is meaningless next to its quality. Note that Aromage monsters have two types of effect: one that is active when the controller's life points are higher than their opponent's life point, and one that activates when life points are increased. Bergamot is the heavy hitter with a life point greater effect that grants piercing to all plant monsters in the field, and a life point gain effect that increases its attack by 1,000 until the opponent's next end phase. Bergamot is okay at best because its life point greater effect is rather pedestrian. For really, when has piercing ever been good on a consistent level? Very rarely there'll be times when, oh man, it's great if I had piercing. Most of the time you're not saying, man, if only I had piercing. The fact that it's a tribute monster with no real protection also limits its wow factor. The only saving grace for this card is that it is a plant, and its 3,900 attack point potential in combination with Garden allows you to run over almost anything in the game. However, in my opinion, I don't think that provides enough benefit to run it in the main deck. Siding one copy, though, seems to be a smart idea. I like Rosemary even less than I like Bergamot, because in my opinion its life point gain effect is alright, but it's one-sided Frozen Fitzgerald, which can be useful at times, most notably against Cosmos, but because the ability only applies to monster effects and not spell or traps as well, its influence is limited. Rosemary's life point gain effect is basically pointless, for at this point in time, position switching is even less valuable than piercing in my opinion, and while you can combo it with Jasmine, putting a normal summon Jasmine into defense mode, such a play is of limited value. While Rosemary does have the highest attack points for the non-tribute Aromages, its effects are so lackluster that I don't run any copies in my deck because I think they're just better options to produce victory. Cananga is one of those cards that is good in a group and kind of mediocre as a single. Its life point greater effect is actually fairly helpful, letting Cananga kill a number of level 4 or lower monsters by itself as an individual, and if multiples are on your field, very little will be around to survive. The life point gain effect is a double-edged sword because of its mandatory aspect. On the positive side, Kananga's effect basically renders battle traps worthless, and in combination with something like anti-spell fragrance can pretty much be a waking nightmare for your opponent. On the negative side, those Call of the Haunted or Fiendish Chains that sit lifelessly on the opponent's field will have to be returned to the opponent's hand if no other targets exist, giving them new life. Thus, when activating a life gain effect, be aware of this drawback. This drawback notwithstanding, I run 3 copies, and you'll see why a little later. Not surprisingly, Jasmine is the best monster of the archetype currently, for drawing is almost always good, and there is no overlapping limitation on the drawing, i.e. if 2 Jasmine are on the field when life points are increased, you can draw 2 cards, not just 1. Its life point greater effect is also nice, allowing you to summon a Jasmine in attack mode, get a draw through something like Garden, and then normal summon another plant monster in general. Finally, its defense is nothing to sneeze at, for 1900 can survive a number of attacks from monsters that are commonly normal summoned, and at 2400 defense via Garden's effect, it can survive a lot more. 3 copies are a must. While it is not a plant, Aroma Pot is also very important for this deck, creating a soft stall lock, and this card along with Garden will be the principal means to increase your life points. The one letdown for Aroma Pot is its battle destruction immunity, and its life gain is tied to being flipped face up, thus it almost never will be special summoned, thus it can be a little slow, having to be set from your hand, unless you want to use Book of Moon on it for some desperate reason. Combining Aroma Pot and Dried Winds can be devastating for the opponent, because it produces a free monster destruction once per end phase as long as you can target. So I run 3 copies, although I think that seems to be unpopular among a number of other Aroma Mage players. Moving on to the only direct one direct support spell, and the most important spell in the deck, Aroma Garden. Logically, there's nothing bad about this card. 500 life points per turn as long as an Aroma monster is on the field, which is not difficult to achieve. 500 attack and defense points until the opponent's end phase when this card is activated for all monsters, not just Aroma monsters, or even monsters that are on the field at the time of the activation. So you can summon a monster after you use Garden's effect, and that monster will also gain 500 attack and defense. Finally, the 1000 life point gain for when an Aroma monster is destroyed can work very well in combination with Dried Winds, in that there will be a kind of a cost associated with destroying your Aroma monsters for the opponent. Run 3 Garden. I run 2 copies of Dried Winds, which is a card I think that doesn't get the respect it deserves, maybe because of the whole targeting is bad type mindset right now, but when pendulums start taking over, targeting will be good again. The ability to once per turn during either turn destroy one face-up monster on the opponent's field when your life points are increased typically will produce numerous pluses over the lifespan of that particular Dried Winds. This advantage is even more devastating because not only is the opponent losing the monster, but the opponent will typically have to adjust his or her strategy to work around Dried Winds. During your turn, Dried Winds will typically remove monsters from the opponent's field, allowing you to have direct attacks. Finally, if these advantages were not enough, if the controller's life points are 3,000 or more than the opponent, this card can destroy at least 2 or even 3 monsters on the opponent's field at the cost of the difference, even if during the opponent's turn, which can stop big-time pendulum plays by your opponent. While at times this cost may seem very high, 4,000 plus life point, it is definitely nice to have in certain situations when your opponent might wrest control of the duel away from you. Yes, it's true that, as mentioned before, Dried is less valuable against Magispectors and Cosmos because of the whole targeting thing. It should be sided out, but against the Pendulum deck menace that will be coming in the very near future, if you can say that it's not already here, Dried Winds is an essential card to help Aromages keep play. I also run 2 copies of Humid Wind as it allows free search once per turn, both adding an Aroma monster to your hand, as well as thinning your deck at times for an inconsequential life point cost of 1,000 for this deck. Humid Wind is also a nice comeback card in the sense of its continuous once per turn 500 life point gain effect when you have lower life points than your opponent, especially in combination with Dried Winds. The biggest problem for Humid Winds really isn't its fault, but it's simply a lack of good Aromage monsters, especially as individual hitters. For while Jasmine and Aroma Pot are both nice cards by themselves, they really can't do much other than kind of quasi-stall. If Aromages ever receive good monsters that can act individually, then Humid Winds will become one of the best trap cards in the game. Moving on to the non-Aromage monsters, the breakdown is rather self-explanatory in a sense. First, because almost all of the Aromages are plants, 3 copies of Lonefire Blossom are basically required, for not only does it improve deck versatility, it also plays well to the general theme of this particular deck design. Lonefire Blossom is the obvious choice. Then the deck can veer in multiple directions depending on your personal playstyle. Some good cards are like Yugioh due to the quick play life point gain and attack gain effects, especially for the battle trap clearance effect of Cananga. Twilight Rose Knight is also useful. Normal summon it to special summon a plant monster like Jasmine in defense mode to take advantage of its effect without its bad attack point. Rose Knight is also a tuner, which affords some more extra deck versatility due to the inconsistent XZ plays of this deck due to the varying levels of the Aromages. For those seeking field presence, Cosmo Wicked Witch is a nice card. For the 1,000 cost of its effect, is typically easily recouped in this deck. For more of a lockdown approach, Cactus Bouncer is a quality choice, especially because Jasmine's double normal summons effect can get around its no special summoning. In this deck build, I like running 2 copies of Twilight Rose Knight and 2 copies of Cactus Bouncer and no copies of Yugioh or Wicked Witch. Finally, closing out the monsters, I run 1 copy of Glow-up Blub to help further supplement Synchro plays and 1 copy of Gigaplant for more special summoning power and attack power. For the spells, I run 1 Raigeki and 1 Soul Charge, along with 2 copies of Miracle Fertilizer, which has the chief advantage of being able to activate it right away instead of having to wait a turn with the other popular revival-based cards like Call the Haunted. Losing the normal summon hurts, but the ability to potentially use Fertilizer multiple times over multiple turns alleviates some of that sting. Furthermore, due to all of the annoying cannot target cards in the game, I like running one copy of Moon Mirror Shield, which can work nicely with Cananga and its Battle Trap blowback effect to increase the probability of eliminating those cannot target effects with higher attack point, and also can supplement Jasmine. Jasmine attack power is no longer a liability with the Moon Mirror Shield equipped to it. Finally, finishing up the spells is what I think is a key card among Aromage decks as it stands right now, Inferno Reckless Summons. Notice that both Jasmine and Cananga are nice cards by themselves, but in multiples they're completely brutal for the opponent. Inferno Reckless Summons can produce these multiples rather consistently due to the different levels of special summoning in this deck, with Lonefire Blossom focusing on the deck, Twilight Rose Knight focusing on the hand, and Miracle Fertilizer focusing on the graveyard. Some people are probably turned off by Inferno Reckless Summons because, oh, my opponent gets to summon too. 2 points to this. One, if I'm drawing 3 cards off Jasmine, you can go ahead and special summon 2 more monsters from your deck if you want. Or if I'm going to put 3 Canangas on the field and your monster is going to be dropped by 1,500 attack points, maybe even a 2,000 difference if I then later activate Aroma Garden, go ahead and put those 2 extra monsters on the field. Second point, we're in the age of pendulums now. Inferno Reckless Summons doesn't let you get stuff from your extra deck, so if you're facing a pendulum deck, Inferno Reckless Summon is almost a big-time bonus for you. Also, Inferno Reckless Summons can target Lonefire itself, producing significant levels of deck thinning and variety in what you want to summon. Traps, I like running 3 of the most important staples, 1 Torrential, 1 Bottomless, and 1 Solemn Warning, along with the quasi-staple Vanity's Emptiness. For the remaining trap options, they're similar to the above issue regarding the non-Aromage monsters. There are a number of options. You can run some of the Mirror Force variants for protection. For monster effect negation, you can run Solemn Notices if you can afford them after Breaker Shadows comes out. You can run anti-spell fragrances to ward off pendulum summoning in combination with Cananga's effect. You can run Dark Bribes to negate big play spell or trap cards. In my main deck right now, I run those 3 anti-spell fragrances, but if you can afford them, I probably would recommend the Solemn Warnings to stop the pendulum summons themselves, because the life point cost is really irrelevant. Don't sell Dark Bribes short, though, because there are those rogue decks that tend to destroy with a lot of force, and you flip over a Dark Bribe to stop a Raigeki, and those decks are pretty much dead in the water if you've Inferno Reckless summoned. For the extra deck, not surprisingly, I run a combination of Synchro and XZ monsters. I run 1 Crimson Blader, 1 Yazi, 1 Clearwing Synchro Dragon, 1 Black Rose Dragon, 1 Goyo Guardian, 1 Red Wyvern, 1 Hi-Speedroid Chanbara, 1 Herald of the Arclight, 1 Phonon Pulse Dragon. For the XZs, I run 1 Meliae of the Trees, 1 Mechquipped Angineer, 1 Wind-Up Zenmaines, 1 Gachi, 1 Sky Cavalry, and 1 Sylvan Princessprite, in case I need to put 2 Aroma Pots together into an XZ. Note that after Breakers of Shadows comes out, I'm actually thinking about removing the Yazi, the Red Wyvern, the Gachi, and the Mechquipped Angineer for 1 Quasar and 3 copies of Goyo Defender, as summoning Quasar in this deck through the Defenders and Phonon Dragon is actually fairly viable. Overall, I think that before the cannot target craze hit Yu-Gi-Oh card design, Aromages were a lot more competitive than most people realized. However, various cannot target cards do limit the effectiveness of their biggest gun in Dried Winds. In my experience, this deck does need to run a card like Inferno Reckless Summon to be consistently competitive due to the sheer power possessed by Jasmine and Cananga when they're on the field in multiples, and the general lack of other quality Aromage monsters. So, that's my Aromage deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.